You know the drill. You download a new app, this huge wall of text pops up, and what do? We scroll right to the bottom and smash that I agree button without reading a single word. We've all done it. But what if one of those clicks wasn't just for a simple software update? What if it was for a subscription that you could literally never, ever escape?
And really, that's the core question we're digging into today. We're going to unpack the story of AuraMind, a meditation app that promised all this peace and tranquility, but what it actually delivered was a permanent financial chain hidden deep in the fine print.
So how does this even happen? How does a simple, innocent-looking wellness app become the tool for a digital crime this big? Well, it all starts with the contract itself.
The weapon here wasn't some sophisticated piece of code. It was a piece of legalese called the Evergreen Covenant. Now, this is not your typical Netflix subscription that just renews every month. No. This was built from the ground up to be a one-way, unbreakable financial bond that lasts as long as you do, for your entire life.
And just get a load of the language they used, buried deep on, like, page 7 of the Terms of Service. It's so dense and confusing, it almost sounds philosophical. It talks about a value-adjusted participation fee for a state of mindful being. I mean, what does that even mean? The thing is, this language was never written to be understood. It was written to be skipped.
So let's just break this down for a second, because the gap between what people thought they were getting and what they actually got was just massive. On the one hand, you see a simple, free app to help you relax. But on the other hand, the reality you just unknowingly agreed to was a permanent, lifelong tax of 0.5% of your total income, every single year.
Okay, so who on earth comes up with a trap this meticulous? This wasn't some quick cash grab. It was the work of a true mastermind, someone with a very specific and, frankly, chilling philosophy.
So meet Dr. Alistair Vance. He's not your typical criminal mastermind. This guy was a brilliant academic, and his expertise was in two very specific fields: contract law and behavioral economics. That gave him the absolute perfect toolkit to exploit the exact way our brains work, or, don't work, when we're faced with these digital agreements.
And this quote, this was his whole philosophy. You see, Vance didn't really see this as theft. To him, it was this grand intellectual experiment. He wanted to prove that our attention is just a resource to be captured and controlled. The money? Oh, the money was just how he kept score in his twisted little game, to prove that you can actually engineer obligation.
So with thousands, maybe tens of thousands of people caught in this trap, how did this whole scheme finally get discovered? Well, what's fascinating is it wasn't a bank or some government agency that figured it out. It was the everyday people who were caught in the snare.
It all started with these tiny little anomalies. You had a freelance designer, Elena Rossi, who spotted these weird, tiny fluctuating charges on her bank statement. At the same time, you have an accountant, Ben Carter, who's doing his taxes and finds this strange deduction he can't explain. Two totally different people in two completely different financial worlds, both noticing the same tiny leak.
And this is where the power of the internet just takes over. A single post on an online forum connecting the dots, and it just goes viral. All of a sudden, thousands of people realized they were all victims of the exact same legally binding financial drain. The crime wasn't exposed by a single clue. It was exposed by the pattern.
So, naturally, a massive class action lawsuit follows, and it lands on the desk of a consumer rights lawyer named Maya Chen. And her job was basically to figure out how to deconstruct Dr. Vance's perfectly legal, yet totally criminal, trap.
She had this really methodical three-phase plan. First, she had to trace the digital paper trail, find every version of the contract. Second, create a behavioral blueprint of the person who wrote it to understand why they wrote it that way. And third, you got to follow the money to see how the whole machine works.
So that behavioral blueprint part led them straight to Vance's old academic papers. And what they found was chilling. He'd actually coined a term for the exact vulnerability he exploited: skim fatigue. He knew from his research that if you make a block of text dense enough and boring enough, the human brain will just instinctively look for the easiest way out, and that is always the I agree button.
But here's the absolute most devious part of the whole thing. The investigation found that the Evergreen Covenant, that lifetime clause, it wasn't even in the original app people downloaded. Oh no! It was slipped in through a mandatory terms update almost a full year later. People agreed to it just by opening the app one day, long after they'd already come to trust it.
So this brings up a huge legal problem, right? How do you fight a contract that millions of people technically, legally agreed to? A simple lawsuit for theft?
just wasn't going to cut it. The legal strategy had to be just as sophisticated as the crime itself.
So Maya Chen's team launched this multi-front assault. First, they filed for an injunction to immediately stop the money from being taken out of people's accounts. Then, they filed a huge complaint with the Federal Trade Commission about all the deceptive practices. But their main goal, their holy grail, was to find proof of something called material misrepresentation, basically to prove that the deception was intentional from the very beginning.
And you're not going to believe where they found it. Their secret weapon, the thing that cracked the whole case, came from a single user. It was a retired judge, of all people, who had actually printed out a physical copy of the original terms of service and made notes on it. That one piece of paper proved the lifetime clause was added later, and it just shattered Vance's whole defense that everybody knew what they were signing up for from day one.
So after all that, what was the final verdict? And maybe more importantly, what does this absolutely chilling story tell us about the dozens of digital agreements we all sign every single day?
The outcome was really nuanced but incredibly powerful. Dr. Vance wasn't actually convicted of theft. He was convicted for fraudulent inducement to contract. And that's a key difference. The legal win wasn't just about getting the money back. It was about establishing in court the profound deception that happened behind the simple act of clicking agree.
Even from detention, Dr. Vance was completely unrepentant. His final statement wasn't an apology. It was this haunting, twisted reframing of his crime. He claimed he wasn't a thief. He was just making a philosophical point about what our own attention is worth in this digital age.
And that really brings us right back to where we started, to that single click. The Aura Mind story is a huge warning sign, and it forces us to ask a really uncomfortable question. In a world of endless terms and conditions, for everything from our social media apps to our smart thermostats, what other obligations are we agreeing to without even realizing it? What hidden costs are lurking just one click away?